Antes de comenzarmos, ese video fue un pedido de dos amigos maravillosos do subscribestar. Yeah, I'm not keeping this up the whole video. I cannot speak Portuguese. Oh my god, what kind of language is this? Still, this is gonna be really exciting.
No Rio de Janeiro, quem quer ser policial tem que escolher. Ou se corrompe, ou se omite, ou vai pra guerra. Meu nome é Capitão Nascimento. Eu chefiava a equipe alfa do BOP. Eu já tava naquela guerra faz tempo e tava começando a ficar cansado dela. Get lost in this city, try to find myself. I went up a different person, came down somebody else. I know it ain't right, but it's all in my head. Boy, I'm surprised that I'm still alive. I should be dead.
Tropa de Elite, also known as Elite Squad. This is the 2007 film adapting the novel by the same name, which documents the exploits of the Special Operations Battalion, also known as the BOPE. They're an elite police unit in Brazil that have quite an interesting history, putting it very lightly. The BOPE have quite the reputation, not just in Brazil, but the world over, but I'll get into that later. All you have to know is they got their start sometime around the mid to late 70s. They were created to address the growing issue of cartel violence, which exploded in South America during this time period, as this was the rise of the cocaine trade, with guys like Pablo Escobar becoming a force to be reckoned with, and Colombia alone, on top of Brazil always struggling with issues of poverty. Entire chunks of the country were inhospitable, full of violence, controlled by gangs who ruled with an iron fist, who could even intimidate the police, who were already dealing with issues of corruption and incompetence. So BOPE was established to essentially be the equal and opposite reaction to the problem. They would meet wholesale violence with wholesale violence. To put it simply, they're a death squad. Officially, they're a unit of the Brazilian military police, sort of like what SWAT is for America. In actuality, they're guys who are sent in to shake up or tear down gangs and favelas with extreme prejudice. They started off as an offshoot to the Brazilian Special Forces. It's why they have similar logos. The Commandos have a knife piercing a skull from below, the BOPE have a knife piercing from above, a sort of wink and nod to their origins. Receiving training from guys like the Israeli military and even America, they ended up becoming the premier experts on urban combat, to the point that they advised UN troops going into Haiti. So don't think this is just a bunch of cops who slap on tactical gear for a drug raid. These dudes are in a league all of their own. They've blown up in popularity, mainly due to the film, and also because they served as the inspiration behind the UFE in Max Payne 3, painted as an amoral and corrupt private army to a dirty politician, which is interesting. They're also in Siege. Elite Squad, the film, serves as an introduction into BOPE, how they operate, what they deal with, and the culture around them. It was directed by Jose Padilla, who has made a ton of stuff revolving around cartels and their conflicts in South America. His most famous projects beyond Elite Squad are easily City of God and Narcos. City of God being a phenomenal movie that breaks down what life is like for those living in the favelas, with characters trapped living around gang violence, trying to break out of it in their own various ways. Yeah, definitely sit down to watch this movie. It is incredible, and actually serves as a good companion piece with Elite Squad, though once again, we'll talk about that later. The film was written by Padilla along with Brulio Mantovani and Rodrigo Pimentel. Pimentel actually served as one of the writers of the novel, himself being an ex-BOPE veteran, and there's belief that one of the protagonists of the film is based on Pimentel. Now, the book was semi-realistic, semi-fictional. It took liberties with reality for the sake of drama, but still served as a breakdown to how life actually is for the BOPE. The film revolves around three separate characters who all get involved with BOPE. You have Nascimento, a captain reaching 10 years with the unit and itching to retire now that he has a son on the way, Neto, a rookie cop with impulse issues that finds the idea of joining BOPE exciting, and Matthias, an idealist who truly believes in restoring law and order, but that puts him in conflict with those around him as he tries to go to college to become a lawyer. Each of the men have their own motivations for why they joined the unit and have different perspectives on what it means to them. Nascimento joined because he just truly despises drug dealers. He has zero sympathy for these people and is quick to become downright monstrous to them, feeling the only way to truly end the problem is to retaliate as viciously as humanly possible. Neto wants to join because he just loves the action, as BOPE is a full force style of unit compared to being a regular beat cop. He also grew disgusted and normalized incompetence and corruption from the other officers. Matthias joins for a pretty similar reason, feeling like he's just beating his head against the wall as a regular cop, stuck with commanders that go out of their way to make sure he can't do his job. So he feels the only way he can really make a difference is with the battalion. Let me say this right out the gate. Elite Squad is a fantastic movie. You might think from the title it's just some cheap Redbox type action flick, something you see a dime a dozen of on Amazon and never give a second glance to. Especially since most reviews deem this as just a mindless action movie that makes the cops a bunch of superheroes. Yes, this is an actual take some critics have of the film, but you would be wrong. dead wrong. This is far from a mindless action movie. In fact, this is a pretty damn in-depth exploration of things such as cartel life and police corruption. There's a lot of thought put into the film, which makes sense considering one of the writers literally served in the unit, and the director of the film made an entire career of exploring these exact themes and histories. Hell, you can honestly see this as a sort of proto-Narcos. It shares a lot of DNA with the show, and you can see how Padilla was slowly forming the basis to what that series would become in his mind, especially when you get to the sequel. Though visually, Elite Squad looks far closer to City of God, it has that same dirty, overexposed style City of God used, looking washed out in some scenes, though on purpose, to emphasize how dirty and unwelcoming the favelas truly are. A major aspect to Elite Squad is, to put it bluntly, the realism. There's a ton of details that keep it solely in the realms of reality. The guns sound heavy, to the point I wouldn't be shocked if they went the heat route and just had actors fire off blanks and record the sound. On top of that, the violence is grisly. It never shies away from things such as torture or grievous injuries. It's all shown in a very matter-of-fact way. It simply is what it is, which is the best possible way to describe the feel of Elite Squad. It's unafraid to depict the Bope engaging in unethical and violent actions, because that's what they do in real life. What's the point of prettying it up or trying to hide it? Everyone knows what they do and who they do it to. The corruption the police engage in is depicted as just a normal part of the job. It's never given a dramatic reveal or painted as a twist. No shit, Brazilian cops are corrupt, and they even break down different forms of their corruption, the escalating levels to it. It makes a pretty big point that the cops are just another gang. There are good guys trying to do their job, but they're forced to either stay quiet or join under risk of death. Nacimento's rage extends to the corrupt cops as well, who he sees as exactly as bad as the dealers, and isn't shy to kill them if he can get away with it. Violence is such a normal part of life that nobody questions it. They don't debate if it's the right thing to do, because it's the only thing they can do. Even before they join Bope, Neto and Matthias end up getting pulled into some shady stuff themselves. It's just how their world is, whether they like it or not. Now, before we go any further, I'm gonna put up a spoiler warning for Elite Squad. Sit down and watch this film. It is a fantastic time. Also, check out the sequel, which I'm also gonna spoil, but we're gonna get into that when it's time to get into it. Just know that it's a different beast. Not in a bad way, but it does cover different issues from the original.
Cara, eu tenho que admitir. Eu tava com pavio curto.
Aponta agora! Aponta agora!
So the actual story of Elite Squad is Bope preparing for a visit from the Pope. They're ordered to crack down on the favelas in order to prevent any incidents, and do so in a very shock and awe kind of fashion. Neto and Matthias are pulled in after having to save a fellow officer, Fabio, from being killed due to a deal gone wrong. More specifically, the two stole money meant to pay off the cops so they could fix the station's cars. Good intentions that spiral out of control, resulting in a massive gun battle where they're saved by Nacimento's unit. Owing the men their lives, all three try to join Bope, though Fabio is quickly filtered out as Nacimento figured him as a dirty cop right from the get-go. So only Matthias and Neto get to actually join. While this is happening, Matthias is struggling to fit in at his college, clashing with the more progressive students over their opinions on law enforcement, especially having problems as his group of friends get involved with one of the gangs in the favela. They want to set up an NGO to help people, but now they're in bed with a drug dealer. It's so bad that Matthias has to hide the fact he's a cop from them, even before joining Bope, since he's well aware that a cop hanging out in the favelas is a death sentence. But his experiences with the unit harden him, making him more cynical, angry, even resentful towards his friends. A large part of the movie is Nacimento trying to find a guy who can replace him as team leader. He's about to become a father, and is increasingly terrified of getting killed. He feels his time is up, and he just wants out. So he views Neto and Matthias as a chance to groom someone as his successor. His instincts are correct. Both show extreme potential, but they have their flaws. Neto is too impulsive, rushing out ahead into danger without thinking. Meanwhile, Matthias thinks too much, too aware of what's happening around him and trying to balance a double life. He's going into the slums as a commando, then trying to pretend he's an average college student. And none of this is helped by the incompetence of the police, making their public image all the worse. One of the major themes of Elite Squad is the idea of the police and what their role is in society. It raises serious criticisms about Brazilian law enforcement, showing how not only are they not solving the issue, but they also profit off it and make things worse. They gladly get in bed with narcos, selling them guns, offering protection, sometimes even performing hits for them. The corruption stretches all the way up the ladder, to the point that it's downright routine. It's why I'm honestly shocked whenever I see complaints that this movie is pro-cop. It makes its feelings very clear on the matter. Bope isn't glorified or treated as some kind of savior. They're extremely violent men venting their frustrations out on the drug dealers. They're pissed off at watching neighborhoods turn into war zones, at guys that are supposed to be fucking helping them, turning around and selling narcos guns that are then used to shoot at them. It's not glorification. It's simply establishing everyone involved is human. They have their flaws, their biases, and they make mistakes. They're stuck in a shitty situation that will never truly get better, no matter what they do. The best they can do is try to avenge the people victimized by drug traffickers, fully aware that by next week there'll be a new one to take the last guy's place. They can't stop drugs from flowing across the planet, but they can scare the assholes bad enough to consider taking a day off. Or two. Bope are treated as an extreme solution to an extreme problem, since they wouldn't even need to exist if the cartel problem wasn't already crippling the entire fucking country. The gang lord the kids get involved with, Bayano, is a ruthless killer that is not afraid to execute anybody that pisses him off. He's already killing people and pushing drugs across the favela, using the college students as dealers since he feels it lets them skirt around the rules, as they can deal outside the slums and towards the rich kids. And the worst part is, really, he's a small-time guy, just controlling a single slice of the favela. There's tons of others just like him, some of which are leagues more powerful, and each one is turning the favela into war zones long before Bope ever shows up. While it never tries to say what the Bope does is totally cool and should be done to every criminal ever, it does make a point about how, really, the biggest tragedy of the story is that Bope even needs to exist in the first place, that the situation is such a massive clusterfuck that the government just says screw it and sends in squads of guys to shoot anybody they see with a gun, to scare the shit out of the narcos until they just stop. But it's not as simple as just talking the dealers down. These are psychotic killers that think the only way to survive is to victimize other people without mercy. So the only answer to this is by sending in bigger groups of psychotic killers. There's more than a few scenes that directly address this. For one, you have the scene where Matthias debates his class on the role of the police. The rest of the students completely write the cops off as just abusive fascists that only want to hurt others. While that is true of the corrupt ones, Matthias addresses there are good people trying to help. They need support to be able to do their jobs and want to make things better, but he's quickly shouted down. A sad irony being that Matthias is the good cop that wants to help, but the rest of his class just write him off as a bootlicker, which sets up his arc of becoming much more misanthropic and cynical. As he learns of his friend's involvement in Bayano, here he is trying to bring any form of fucking civilization to the favelas, nearly getting his head blown off in gunfight after gunfight, and there are his friends chatting it up with a drug dealer, completely unaware of the kind of man he is, and zero clue of the actual danger they put themselves into. Nascimento is struggling with an anxiety disorder that's worsening as the birth of his son draws closer, only made worse by his downright monstrous rage he tries to keep bottled up and away from his home life. But the film raises the question of, how the hell do you keep it bottled up? Every single day he's surrounded by death and chaos, and it's only a few miles away from his house. He's about to bring a child into a world that could burn it all to the ground from a single bad mistake, and it causes his marriage to tank, unable to keep the balance in check as tensions between the gangs and Bope reach a boil. The guy is just seen too much, too often, and his humanity is tapped out. The point that as much as he talks about wanting to quit and get out of the life, you can tell part of him truly loves what he does, tormenting the narcos and making them suffer, as Nascimento has plenty of scenes where he flat out tortures suspects, to the point that they're basically just extended executions. He's finally able to get the anger out on people he sees as deserving his wrath. It's a major aspect to his character, the fact Nascimento truly despises the whole situation. He hates the dealers, he hates the corrupt cops, he hates the college kids who buddy up with the narcos, the people who say Bope go too far. Nascimento has a lot of hate to share, which is why he latches onto Matthias and Neto. He sees that same frustration in him that's in himself. Foolish idealism that maybe someday things will get better, mixed with the fury that comes from realizing it's not going to be anytime soon. The most they can do is just keep killing drug dealers. That's not to say Nascimento is heartless. In fact, it's the exact opposite. His anger stems from the fact that he feels like he doesn't have a choice in the matter. If they don't do their jobs, more people will die, even if it means tormenting a child hired as a lookout, even if it means condemning that child to death for snitching. If anything, especially because of that, Nascimento despises the hypocrisy. Bope goes too far with their methods, meanwhile the narcos can do whatever they want without consequences. They can kill people and force kids to work with them, killing them if they ever become a problem, and it's all seen as a normal part of life. No shit the guy would become a monster, because anything less would just be an insult to the stakes. If these guys want to be big bad scary drug dealers, that means dealing with the consequences. If you want to work for the devil, you better be ready to die for him. Now you might have noticed I've only really been talking about Nascimento and Matthias. Neto hasn't really come up as much. That's because sadly he doesn't make it to the end of the movie. He's killed in an ambush by the drug dealers when he tries to do a favor for Matthias, as the dealers learn about his presence in the favela, punishing the NGO, executing two of the members, and putting a hit out on Matthias, which is sadly what Neto ended up walking into. This is what kicks off the final act of the film, since the death of Neto pushes Bope to full-blown retaliation. The already tense situation is now full-scale war. with Bope launching an assault on the favela to track down Baiano and execute him. It's also where the culmination to Matias and Nascimento's arcs come to an end. Matias, who blames himself for Neto's death, completely cuts off the rest of the college students, beating the shit out of the one that snitched him out to Baiano in the first place, and it was at a protest, which he sees as spitting on the memory of his friend. Nascimento, with his marriage already in shambles, and a Bope agent targeted by the dealers, decides to dramatically overreact to the situation. Loyalty to his men supersedes his own problems. He embraces that anger he's been struggling with the whole film, seeing the dealers as reprehensible enough to dedicate his life to fighting. Bope do some violent shit to find Baiano, torturing scores of people and barging into the favela with a fucking army. Since the rules of the favela were broken, you can whack a corrupt cop who stupidly walked into a bad situation, which is what happened with Fabio, but Baiano and his men targeted a Bope agent. They didn't know Neto was with them, but he was dead anyway. So now Bope is aware the narcos are targeting their guys, and this is a unit specifically designed to punish cartel actions. Right from the get-go, Baiano knows he's screwed, sending his girlfriend and their kid out of the favela as he waits for Bope to arrive. There's a grim realization that he knows he's going to die. He tries not to, going underground and booking it when he realizes they know where he is, but the minute they get their hands on him, he just accepts what's about to happen, simply asking them not to shoot him in the head so as not to mess up his wake, which is the worst possible thing he could have said, since that inspires Nascimento to grab a shotgun. This is Matias' final test. Blow this guy's head off. Execute him right there. And Matias passes with flying colors, not even hesitating to rack the shotgun and ending the film with the gunshot. This is nowhere near a happy ending. Tons of people are dead, and Matias and Nascimento stay with this unit that only guarantees more death and carnage. But this wasn't about getting a happy ending or saving the favela. It's about getting justice for Neto, for the kids Baiano murdered. Cartel violence is just something they're stuck living with, but at the very least, they can hit back. Put it simply, favela justice. The first Elite Squad is a fantastic film. It's extremely gritty and uncompromising, willing to show you distressing themes and actions without blinking an eye. It's willing to humanize characters you think would be two-dimensional caricatures and make you feel for them. You don't want to see Matias or Nascimento die. You feel bad when Neto does die. Even a guy like Fabio, who is blatantly corrupt, has a lot of charm to his character. He's fun to watch, whether he wins or gets his comeuppance. Elite Squad is just a damn good movie. Check it out. Now, I mentioned before that this has a sequel, Elite Squad: The Enemy Within. This came out about 3 years later in 2010. It follows the events of the first film 13 years into the future. Nascimento is promoted to a lieutenant colonel and Matias has replaced him as the captain. Right from the get-go, this is a different beast from the original. The sickly, washed-out cinematography has been replaced with something far more sleek, looking far closer to Narcos than City of God. It also covers different territory. The original was a breakdown of police corruption and the role of Bope and Rio. The sequel explores the idea of the Narcos learning to live with them, becoming smarter in their tactics and weaseling their way into the Brazilian government. Bope started off as a sledgehammer solution, and the sequel addresses that not every situation calls for them. You see the other side of the coin on the issue, exploring an activist group that is genuinely trying to improve things in the favela, made up by Nascimento's ex-wife and son, and her new husband. Yeah, Nascimento's wife shacked up with an activist that is strictly anti-Bope, going so far as to call Nascimento a fascist and trying to teach his son to adopt more progressive mindsets. You can already guess Nascimento's opinion on the guy, but the thing is that Diogo, the activist, truly believes in what he's doing. It'd be one thing if he was a corrupt asshole running defense for the cartels, but the guy wants to use peaceful methods to solve as many situations as he can, and you do see moments where his methods do work. A big part of Enemy Within is addressing the fact that, well, cartels are complicated. They can pop up from fucking anywhere and can build to insane amounts of influence and power. They can learn the system and exploit it to its fullest, and they have friends in high places that can even fuck over a group as infamous as the Bope. A major plot point in the film is that the Bope are on the back foot after a prison raid that resulted in multiple deaths, causing a new push for higher scrutiny towards the group. Nascimento's promotion is actually a punishment, as he's transferred out of Bope into police intelligence, pulling him out of the field and into a desk job, where he's stuck wearing a leash. Matias is thrown back into regular police, a place full of the incompetence and corruption that pushed him into joining the unit in the first place. So they get screwed over hard over the incident, to the point that Matias goes straight to a journalist to expose how Bope is repeatedly denied support, and there are figures in the government that don't want them to win, which ends up blowing up so bad that he gets sent to jail, turning the PR disaster of the prison raid into a full-blown shit show. And things only get worse with the rise of a new gang, made up of Brazilian cops, led by Major Rocha, who ends up being the consequences to Nascimento's actions. When he was still in charge of Bope, Nascimento pushed for more resources for the unit, intending on upping the pressure on the narcos until the whole network becomes unsustainable. And he was right, it was unsustainable. That's because the cops offering protection for the narcos weren't getting their money. The intention was to use this to cause a schism, clear out both sides. But the cops simply decided, why have the middleman anymore? They knew how the narcos worked. There was still the infrastructure intact. Why not just take over? The strong hand approach, ironically, created a much worse beast. since now the narcos are fully aware of not just the drug trade, but the fucking legal system. They could schmooze politicians by pretending to be associated with Bope, who are killing their competition and securing increasing amounts of control. Elite Squad 2, in my opinion, is exactly as good as the original. It's just a different style. Hell, you can easily see it as just the next chapter to the story. You saw the golden age of Bope wreaking havoc on the narcos in the first film. Now you see that even their actions have consequences. They aren't immortal and are in just as much danger as any other party. It never insults the original and tries to say they never did anything good. It's simply that, shocker, taking down cartels is very complicated. There are enemies in the front and the back. And just like the first movie, there's a detailed breakdown of how this all works. Politicians befriend cartels, the cartels need territory cleared out, the politician needs good PR, so they contact shady journalists and the media figures to focus on specific favelas that need pacification and whip the public up into a frenzy. Bope, wanting to get good PR as well, target these favelas, unknowingly giving free real estate to the enemy. It covers themes of media corruption, weaponizing bureaucracy, and raising the question of what solution works with what problem. Sometimes you popping somebody in the head in a dirty alley, sometimes you do use activism to push changes for the entire system. To address the presence of corruption in places where you can't send commandos to shoot people, at least not without major consequences. There are people who downright don't like the sequel, and I think it comes from the fact Bope are put on the defensive for a large chunk of the story. They're under attack from all kinds of threats, and need to be very careful with every move they make. Even Nascimento isn't safe. The film opens on him almost getting killed in a drive-by. Enemy Within is about what happens when your enemy learns from their mistakes. The dumb criminals die, and the smart ones know what to do to not get executed with a shotgun. There's a reason I say Enemy Within is closer than Narcos, because you see a lot of moments where the narcos learn to navigate the law, slipping into deeper cracks and becoming more ingrained. They're not idiots. In fact, underestimating them is the exact mistake Nascimento and Matthias make that causes so much damage. Baiano in the first film is a relatively simple villain. He's a violent drug lord that kills anybody that pisses him off. Rocha, by comparison, is leagues more nefarious. He's essentially Brazilian Al Capone, pushing himself as a figure of the community, lending out money in the favelas, and even owning multiple companies in even more put together parts of the city. Yeah, Rocha's not just a dumb gangbanger. He knows not to be a dumb gangbanger. He needs to be a gangster, which is a whole different level. The first movie isn't exactly a happy story. The sequel is downright angry. It takes multiple shots of the Brazilian government and shows the cowardly tactics the narcos resort to in order to evade capture. It's a frustrated movie. Not frustrating, the movie itself is displeased. Nascimento's arc in the sequel is his growing burnout. He was already getting close in the original, as he was scared to die now that he was about to become a father, but the sequel takes it a step further, showing the guy be jerked around and pushed to a point where he just says fuck it, leaving law enforcement and, ironically, becoming a political activist, hoping to tackle corruption in his own way. It's not so much that Diogo is completely right and did nothing wrong. The film makes it a point the guy was bumbling his way into way too many risky situations. Instead, it shows that these are all tools in a box. You have to use a diverse set of tactics and never stick to one thing for too long. Otherwise, you'll create a new creature that is immune to the old ways, or worse, want you to use them since it benefits them. This is why I say that Enemy Within is a natural next step for the story, because it truly does fit right alongside the original as one larger plot. Hell, in a way, this is just Narcos Brazil. I can easily see this being chopped up into a miniseries, and it would work great, especially if you add City of God into the mix. You essentially get three different perspectives on the issue. City of God for the narcos and people who live in the favelas, Elite Squad for the Bope and law enforcement, and Enemy Within is the aftermath of both. Hell, you can view it as a trilogy if you really want to. Now, I mentioned way at the beginning of the video, Elite Squad 1 was accused of being a pro-cop movie, a mindless action film that glorifies police brutality and says this is all totes cool to do. Anyone who watched the film knows this is bullshit, but it does raise a good question. What were Brazil's thoughts on the film? Put simply, they loved it. Elite Squad was a massive success in the country, and it's hailed as one of the best Brazilian films ever made. And despite it having very clear and concise criticisms against Bope and law enforcement, it ended up being something that ironically boosted their public image. As it turns out, a lot of people in Brazil love the Bope, even with the controversy surrounding them. Because while the Bope can be assholes, at least they aren't the fucking narcos. You gotta be some real douchebags if the actual death squad is seen as heroes by a large chunk of the population. Of course, that's not to say the consensus is unanimous. There's tons of human rights groups and politicians in Brazil that do not waste a chance to condemn them, and to be fair, they have a lot to work with, but don't think that this is a Starship Trooper scenario where the director intended one thing and the audience is seeing something completely different. No, one of the writers of the film is an ex-Bope veteran, and Padilla has a really good track record of just simply telling it like it is. He doesn't really try to glamorize one side or the other, he just paints people as people, and these are all just people at the end of the day. Bope are still ongoing. and in fact, some of their most violent gun battles have occurred within just the last 3 years. One of the more recent ones coming with accusations of full-blown torture and murder, with a guy found dead due to stab wounds and his face covered in suspicious white powder. Now, I'm not saying that Pope forced the guy to eat cocaine, then stabbed him to death and tossed him in a ditch. I'm saying that's what other people have accused them of doing. And this does raise a question about, can Pope really survive as the modern world creeps on? With everyone having a cell phone and social media, how is a group that operates solely off brutality and shock and awe maneuver the landscape, as human rights groups in various parties in Brazil want to use them as a springboard for their career? The public, as far as I'm aware, is still highly respectful of the Pope, but as we've seen time and time again, the public's opinion can be drowned out by the steamroll of political momentum. It doesn't matter if the average Joe actually wants the Pope or not, all it takes the wrong politician in the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone who can get just enough support to completely fuck the whole situation to pieces. Now, don't think I'm condemning Pope or saying they should do better to prevent this. The group exists to fuck up drug dealers. This is just genuine curiosity at how long they can keep going before they're crushed under the weight of public hysteria, which we've seen can be weaponized to downright deadly effect. Especially considering the whole philosophy of the unit is fuck optics, I'm going in. They're guys who aren't meant to be recorded and put on Twitter, since what they get up to was always intended as something you look the other way towards. Did they torture suspects? They're unaware of any such operations, nor would they permit such tactics. It's that kind of open secret deal. And it's especially interesting since Pimentel himself ended up becoming a kind of local celebrity in Brazil. He does a ton of speaking events and podcast appearances where he discusses his time with the unit and opinions on the matter. The guy even has a YouTube channel, something someone should really get around to translating into English because I want to hear more stories from the guy. He seems genuinely cool. Pope in general is something that can't really be defined by black and white. They're an extreme solution to an extreme problem. Everyone has their opinions on them in their history. Max Payne 3 outright painted them as over-the-top villains. Even Elite Squad went out of its way to show that these guys are susceptible to flaws like anyone else. To put it simply, they're human. They get frustrated. They get scared. They don't want to do these things either. But if they don't, they feel like more chunks of Brazil turn into feeding grounds for narcos, which would be leagues worse. To try and judge Pope one way or the other as a big dumb American sitting in a safe neighborhood would just be foolish. These guys are in a completely different world, where hearing AK-47s rattle off is an average night. The most I can say is that it's not a happy situation for anybody, and it's just further proof that the drug trade can only poison everything it touches. Maybe in the future the day will come where Pope dissolves. Hopefully it'll be because they're no longer necessary, but until then, that skull is going to be driving into the favelas, and the most we can hope is as little people die as possible. Bem-vindo Brazil, and all that. Still, that's all I can say about Elite Squad. Check out both films, along with City of God. It's such a great breakdown for the Pope and the cartel situation. These movies will stick in your brain for a long time, and you absolutely should watch these at least once. They're intense, but that's why you're going in to watch the movies, to see uncompromising storytelling. Definitely helps that I love stories about cartels. I've seen Sicario so many times I can practically replay that movie from sheer memory. So this just clicked everything I love about the genre. Pope alone is such a crazy rabbit hole to look into, and that's just Brazil. But do you know who isn't involved with cartels? Gamer subs. Use code TAL at checkout for 10% off. Use the code. Use the code. Use the code to get the plastic bag again. Use the code. They have new cup designs that look really cool. Still, that's all I can say about Elite Squad. It's a great duology that ends exactly where it should. And hopefully I've inspired you guys to sit down and give these a watch. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, subscribe. See you guys. Hey, loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I'm now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.